The thick primary power conduit of Outpost Oricon hummed with enough voltage to vaporize a man. Kalen Vance didn't care. He jammed the stripped copper wiring of his cracked transmitter directly into the bypass interface. The console spat sparks across his grease-stained knuckles. He keyed the unblockable station-wide frequency, clearing his throat. Some people run from the fire, but if you want to see what happens when humanity strikes the match, join us. 6 hours ago, the biggest hazard Kalen faced was a stripped bolt on a cargo loader. The hunted alien had just been a crumpled heap of fractured light on the docking ring floor. Hundreds of boots marched past Lyrian. Oricon was a station of scavengers, and survival meant keeping your eyes forward. Her skin shifted in broken, iridescent geometric patterns, bleeding a faint, luminescent blue onto the grated iron. The crowd simply flowed around her like water around stone. Invisible, until Kalen dropped his crate of salvaged servos. The heavy metal clang echoed dull beneath the scream of ascending freighters. He knelt, ignoring the flashing yellow light of a passing sanitation drone that had already classified her as a non-priority obstruction. Kalen slid his oil-stained sleeves under her shoulders. "You alive?" he muttered. No response. Up close, the terrifying heat of military-grade plasma burns radiated from her side. The cuts were brutally precise. Syndicate work. He carried her back to his maintenance workshop, kicking the heavy security doors shut behind them. The cramped room smelled of ozone, burnt flux, and stale coffee. Kalen cleared his workbench with one violent sweep, sending tools clattering to the deck, and laid her down. He reached for his emergency medical kit, his fingers hovering over the sterile gauze before realizing, no, standard human coagulants wouldn't bond to glowing, crystalline blood. He needed structural repair. He grabbed a pressurized canister of polymer starship sealant. "Stay with me," he whispered. He packed the thick, expanding foam directly into her searing wounds. She woke with a sharp, fractal inhalation. Her eyes, solid black voids without sclera, locked onto his face. The ambient light in the room flickered in time with her erratic pulse. "You carried me," Lyrian said. Her voice sounded like grinding glass and distant chimes. "Someone had to." She tried to sit up, her body rigid with a sudden, localized panic. "I am Lyrian. You have doomed yourself. The Ethelgard Syndicate will trace the biological signature." Kalen wiped luminescent fluid onto a dirty rag. "Trace what?" "A living data key," she breathed, touching her chest where a harsh, blinding light pulsed against her ribs. "The Apex cipher. It opens their secure fleets. Their transit gates. They will burn this entire sector to ash to retrieve what I stole." Before Kalen could process the absolute scale of that threat, the workshop's wall speaker shrieked. A high, mechanical whine. Then the automated, emotionless voice of Oricon Security declared a sector-wide lockdown. A massive bounty had just been authorized for a high-value syndicate fugitive. "Okay." Kalen exhaled a long, steady breath. "Change of plans." He didn't panic. He grabbed a ruined patrol drone from his scrap pile and aggressively pried open its casing. If the syndicate tracked biological frequencies, he just needed to create a ghost. With a small wrench, his favorite, scarred from years of blind, knuckle-busting repairs, he bolted a signal dampener to the drone's core. Would you risk the wrath of an entire galactic empire for a stranger you just met on the floor? Into the maintenance hatch, Kalen ordered, kicking open a rusted floor grate that led into the station's lightless underbelly. Now, dust and the smell of ancient, ionized copper filled the maintenance tunnel as they crawled deeper into the station's forgotten guts. Lyrian moved with a staggered, hitching grace, her bioluminescent skin casting rhythmic pulses of fractured violet against the cramped bulkheads. Kalen led the way, his knees scraping against the cold, iron floor. He reached back every few meters to steady her, his hand grounding her as the station above them began to shiver with the weight of descending syndicate warships. Above, the hunt was no longer a quiet scan. It was a physical erasure of anything that stood in their way. There within the primary conduits, Lyrian whispered, her voice a fragile chime in the dark. Kalen didn't answer. He was busy focused on a small, leaking water pipe that dripped steadily onto a pile of discarded industrial filters. He reached out and tightened a loose valve with a practiced twist of his fingers, a reflex from a decade of keeping this dying station breathing. He needed them predictable. If the syndicate followed the logic of their own machines, they would move toward the strongest signal. Kalen pulled the hacked drone from his belt and wedged it into a junction box, setting the dampener to fracture mode. Suddenly, the Apex cipher signature didn't just exist in the tunnel. It blossomed into a dozen ghostly echoes across the residential grid. The air in the crawlway began to vibrate as Oricon's security systems choked on the sudden influx of contradictory data. "Now," Kalen said, sliding under Lyrian's shoulder to lift her toward the final access node. They emerged into the central relay chamber, a cathedral of pulsing cables and high-voltage warnings. Kalen didn't hesitate. He spliced his cracked transmitter into the main power conduit, the interface screaming as it accepted the unauthorized handshake. The screen on his comm unit flared to life. He wasn't just talking to the room anymore. He was talking to every speaker, every viewport, and every private terminal in the sector. "This is Kalen Vance, Unit B-17, he said, his voice echoing through the station's emergency broadcast. "You're hunting a person you left to die in the dirt, and you think because you have the ships and the armor, we won't notice what you've become." Lyrian stepped forward, her hand pressing against the humming core of the station. She didn't just open a door. The light within her flared, a blinding, supernova white that raced through the station's encrypted architecture, stripping away syndicate firewalls and exposing their secret fleet permissions to the very people they were trying to suppress. One breath. Across the station, the rebellion wasn't a tactical maneuver. It was a spontaneous, jagged eruption of human stubbornness, where dock workers used magnetic clamps to trap armored squads, and engineers flooded gravity wells with coolant just to see the invincible soldiers slip and fall like children on ice. Kalen watched the data scroll. They weren't fighting for a key. They were fighting for the girl he'd picked up off the floor. He sat on the metal deck as the sirens finally shifted from a hunt to a retreat. The syndicate hadn't just lost a courier. They had accidentally reminded 1,000 scavengers that they were still alive. Beyond the thick, reinforced viewport, the dark curve of the station hull reflected the distant, steady glow of a rising sun. A single, small wrench lay on the floor between them, its handle scarred and its chrome finish long since worn away by the grip of a man who refused to walk away.